This is Clear Politics. Hello. Recently, there's been a real wave of resignations among top politicians in the West. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, Justin Trudeau, Kaja Kallas, Olaf Scholz, Michel Barnier, the Landsbergis clan, Mateusz Morawiecki, and others. We, the voters, have shown them the door for their political failures. But their replacements aren't respected by society either. Why are European politicians' ratings falling so fast? And how out of touch are they with the people? Just the facts. You draw your own conclusions. These days, every poll in Western countries shows, to put it mildly, surprising numbers. Sociologists are recording widespread dissatisfaction with those in power, which is quite logical. The usual standard of living is cracking, and along with it, the popularity of prime ministers and presidents who have gotten carried away with war is plummeting. The French haven't had luck with prime ministers. The Fifth Republic is breaking political records. 3 people have left the post in 2024 alone. The fourth, François Bayrou, started work in mid-December and already has a catastrophic approval rating. 80% are dissatisfied with him.
80% of French citizens are unhappy with the current Prime Minister, François Bayrou. This is a record among all heads of government since records began in 1958, according to a poll published on the website of the French Institute of Public Opinion. Never in the history of popularity indexes tracked since 1958 have so many French people been dissatisfied with the Prime Minister as with François Bayrou. 80% is an absolute record, according to the IFOP website.
The French associate the politician with inaction, and he also remains at the center of a scandal over covering up sexual abuse of students at the prestigious Notre Dame de Belarus Catholic school, the Institute notes.
The previous Prime Minister, Michel Barnier, spent less than 3 months in office. He proposed drastic cuts to the social budget. At the end of last year, France was in the grip of a political crisis. The National Assembly passed a vote of no confidence in Barnier. His government became the shortest-lived in the country's history.
Every time I come to France, I'm surprised by the decline in living standards and the prices everywhere now. I'm not even talking about Paris, because Paris, as they say, is a universe of its own. But all over France, I have many friends who just can't accept that prices keep rising. And I must say, the number of immigrants is also growing, with more and more appearing in France. And it's the so-called pure-blooded French who don't really understand or accept this, despite all their tolerance. Because many crimes are committed by people who came from other countries.
Macron's rating has dropped again. Only 23% of respondents view the country's leader positively, while 77% are dissatisfied.
Weak economic growth, an aging population, and a shrinking workforce have led to a huge financial deficit in social funds. And this chronic deficit, which has been growing for decades, could only be fixed by draconian reforms that are absolutely unacceptable to most French people, most voters who end up going on strike endlessly as a result.
Almost at the same time as France, another major EU country has sunk into political instability. The new German chancellor, elected only on the second try, started losing voters' trust before even taking office. In May, less than 30% supported his political approach. Today, his rating has grown a bit, but what's next? Even at the start of his term, political scientists and journalists accused him of hypocrisy.
He lied the first time when he said he was completely against raising the national debt ceiling. He lied. It's been proven. Within 3 days after the Bundestag election results were announced, he reversed his position 180 degrees. The second lie was betraying his own principles when he said he wouldn't cooperate with left-wing extremists. The third, most likely, we'll never see him follow through on his threat to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine.
You wouldn't want to be in Scholz's shoes. The previous administration managed to anger the Germans. The former German chancellor became the most unpopular in 30 years. Last year, only a quarter of voters approved of his work. His rating fell through the floor, and Scholz was called the White House's servant. Even the Kiev regime gave him a nickname for his blandness. Ukraine's former ambassador to Germany called him liver sausage.
About 72% of voters disapprove of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's work. That's according to a poll by the INSA Institute for Public Opinion Research. That's 3 percentage points higher than at the start of last December. Overall, 76% of respondents are dissatisfied with the federal government's work.
There's a year and a half left before the Bundestag elections, but the ruling coalition won't draw any conclusions.
Boastful support for sanctions, a sharp rise in energy prices, and billions poured into the Ukraine conflict will lead to the country's own economy, once proudly called Europe's engine, entering an unpleasant phase of stagnation. Scholz's government still can't explain to citizens why their living standards keep falling and why German companies are going bankrupt or rushing to move production to the US.
As a result, farmers and train drivers will revolt, and a wave of strikes will sweep the country. Then workers at major factories, angry over flagship closures, will join the protests. YouGov analysts will conduct another poll. Its results will be devastating for German politicians.
At the end of August, YouGov analysts commissioned by Berliner Kurier conducted a poll and found that 58% of Germans believe that none of the current politicians, including Chancellor Olaf Scholz, are fit to lead the country. And a study by the Korber Foundation showed that Germans' trust in parties has dropped sharply. In 2020, 29% trusted them. Now it's just 9%.
And that's not all. Almost half of respondents believe things in the country are bad or outright unfair. And 71% of Germans think political leaders live in their own world and look down on the rest of society.
Public anger is understandable. Even the auto industry, Germany's unshakable pride, and a cluster of world-famous brands, is being forced to cut back or shut down production amid catastrophic economic figures. BMW's profits fell 84% last year, Mercedes by 54%. The company is preparing to lay off up to 30,000 people.
Many experts call the German authorities' decisions economic suicide, affecting sectors where Germany was the undisputed leader for decades. For example, since 2023, Volkswagen's profits have dropped by almost 50%. 3 plants are closing, and 10,000 employees will lose their jobs. They're actively protesting, even bringing a coffin with the company's name into the streets. Just 2 years ago, the company announced a cost-cutting program aiming to save 10 billion euros by 2026.
According to German media, gas prices have risen 8-fold in 4 years. At one point, 1,000 cubic meters cost 1,000 euros. Now it's about 600. But during the Nord Stream era, it was just 128. Industry couldn't handle such a jump, especially in chemicals. Nearly 600 companies have cut production or gone into so-called cold mode, meaning a standstill.
One telling example of this failure is the world-famous BASF Group. The flagship of German chemicals announced cuts to capacity, staff, and operating costs at its main production site. The CEO cites falling demand as a main reason. The German economy is stagnating, production is shrinking, so less and less chemical products are needed for all major industries. Notably, BASF only closed its plants in Germany. China, the US, and other countries are much more profitable for the company. It sounds absurd, but it's true.
Keir Starmer has been Prime Minister for a year, but still hasn't earned the public's trust. In December, his approval rating hit a 40-year low, and in May it hit another bottom, dropping to 22%. The main sticking point, of course, is the economy.
Starmer promised growth, but instead, the country is teetering on the edge of stagflation. By autumn, inflation is expected to reach 4% due to rising energy prices. The Bank of England has admitted that a technical recession was avoided only by a miracle. Zero GDP growth in the first quarter of 2025, unemployment possibly reaching 5% by 2026, and a migration crisis worsening social tensions. Analysts note that this year, the economy is expected to grow by just 0.75%, half what was forecast in November. Labour's promises of a fresh start after 14 years of conservative rule have turned out to be empty.
Foreign policy also raises big questions. The Prime Minister is called a Russophobe and a hawk. He keeps ramping up aid to Kyiv. In March 2025, he announced a new $2 billion military aid package for Kyiv, despite growing public discontent at home.
Chaos in London. Keir Starmer's cabinet is in complete disarray amid a budget crisis. Labour's attempts to cut social spending sparked a revolt within the party. As a result, those plans had to be scrapped, and now ministerial resignations are looming. Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves, the cabinet's number 2, literally broke down in tears during a House of Commons session. She'll likely be the first to be thrown out of government, starting the collapse of Starmer's cabinet. It's very reminiscent of the conservative crisis of 2022. There's no money in the budget, and now the debt markets are shaking. We could see a repeat of Liz Truss's short-lived crisis when the pound crashed and London was on the brink of technical default. Now the financial situation is worse, and the economy faces another year of zero growth.
Amid these crises, society is again looking for alternatives, even though prime ministers are already changing like gloves. In recent years, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak have held power for just 8 years between them. Liz Truss lasted only 45 days.
Starmer has become a hostage of his own rhetoric. He came to power on a wave of fatigue with the Tories, but offered nothing but criticism of his predecessors. Labour not only failed to stop migration, but made it worse. Illegal channel crossings rose by 20% in a year. Social programs, including health reform, stalled due to lack of funding. Even Labour's traditional base, the working class, is disappointed. Real incomes fell 3% in a year, while housing and utility prices keep breaking records.
The most popular politician in Britain now is Nigel Farage, who also promises reforms and plays on public fatigue. He promises to tackle migration, regain border control, cut or even end aid to Ukraine, and lower taxes.
The crisis, falling trust in Starmer, and Farage's rise are all symptoms of a systemic breakdown. Labour and the Tories, who have alternated for decades, have exhausted their credit of hope. Economy, migration, social inequality, there's no progress on any of these issues. Farage, like Donald Trump in the US, is exploiting the demand for a strong hand. If Starmer doesn't stop the GDP decline and Badenoch doesn't reboot the Tories, Britain could see a prime minister who was considered a fringe figure just yesterday.
Voices of discontent are also coming more often from across the ocean. Trump has taken such a hard line and silenced so many that even in the heart of democracy, people are stunned. YouGov reports that most Americans believe the U.S. is experiencing a constitutional crisis, and 1 in 4 thinks their country is a dictatorship.
Only half, 50% of Americans believe that the U.S. is a democratic country. 1 in 4, 28%, disagree with this statement. Almost 1 in 5, 22%, couldn't give a definite answer. The majority of Americans, 56%, think that the U.S. is currently experiencing a constitutional crisis.
Another poll. This time, Gallup reports that Americans are losing pride in their country.
According to the Gallup poll, the share of Americans who feel proud of the U.S. has dropped to a record low. A record low 58% of U.S. adults said they are extremely 41% or very 17% proud to be Americans, which is 9 percentage points lower than last year, according to the research service. Democrats are the least likely to feel pride in the U.S. Only 36% of them said they are still proud of the country, compared to 62% a year earlier.
Some regions are so dissatisfied with the authorities that they want to live separately. Newsweek writes that a record number of Californians want to secede from the U.S., 44%. Also, half of the state's residents trust the local government more than the federal one. The article cites experts who say Californians are ready for self-governance.
California is a democratic state, a state with a million genders, transformers, all sorts of strange trends. None of this fits with Trump's conservative agenda. And yes, California is now saying they could secede. I don't think they will. But the internal conflict in America between different clans and groups will definitely keep growing. Trump is trying to reformat America. He's trying to get rid of various non-traditional narratives, some kind of propaganda, again, of non-traditional values and so on. The liberal establishment doesn't like this. Part of the American population doesn't like it. And that's why there's conflict.
In general, the masses are restless in the West. Europeans aren't used to such a sharp drop in living standards. Prices are rising, social support is shrinking, and unemployment is knocking on more doors. High budget deficits, weak economic growth, all against a backdrop of military appetites and reckless spending on Ukraine.
Hotspots of tension are being stoked right from the offices of Western officials. They play with people's lives like characters in a video game or a Hollywood movie. The question is, why? I want you to understand, I'm telling you as someone who holds the same position as they do in the West. If you mess up here, if you do something outrageous, just look at what's happening in France, the UK, Germany, not because I'm exaggerating. Governments there have been changing every year or two. That says a lot. It means they've made a mess at home, and they don't want to cover up their crimes. But by striking civilians, like what happened in Gaza, without protection, or with strikes on Iran, just think about it. All over some test tube again. In Iran, they found a so-called test tube. Tomorrow there'll be nuclear weapons. So they say, we need to strike. Let's think about it. Who gave them the right?
Who allowed it? There's a growing sense in Europe that there aren't any real leaders. And it's not just about character. What today's politicians are doing often doesn't even make sense.
Before his death, Henry Kissinger noted that European elites are degrading, and real power in the world belongs to people who were never elected. Europe's political leaders are incompetent. They have no direction and no understanding of the challenges they face. The late patriarch of American diplomacy specifically criticized French President Macron and German Chancellor Scholz, who in his view, unlike their predecessors, don't understand what their mission is. He compared them to West Germany's first Chancellor, Konrad Adenauer, and General Charles de Gaulle, noting that they understood their purpose and fulfilled their roles.
The image and ratings of another European politician are also in question. European Commission head and professional gynecologist Ursula von der Leyen is embroiled in a deep corruption scandal. A vote of no confidence will be held in the European Parliament in July.
The missing SMS case is linked to the 2021 scandal, when von der Leyen, without consulting EU member states, signed a contract to buy 1.8 billion doses of Pfizer vaccine for a total of 35 billion euros. At the time, the drug trials hadn't even been completed. The scandal was called Pfizergate. Various courts launched proceedings over suspicions of von der Leyen's involvement in corruption. But investigations stalled due to the lack of key evidence, the correspondence between von der Leyen and Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla. At first, Ursula denied the existence of the messages, but when confronted with proof, she refused to release them, claiming the texts were deleted by mistake.
Obviously, ratings will keep falling. The resignation marathon will continue. It seems Europe isn't ready to look at things rationally or sensibly. But Europeans are still afraid to take to the streets en masse. Democracy will meet them with batons and tear gas, as has happened before, so they have to wait until the next elections. Unless, of course, the results get cancelled like they did in Romania. Goodbye.